Brilliant. Yes, okay. So yes, I'll hand it over to Katie to introduce herself, even though you know what's around how long now? A couple of months?
5 months.
5 months. And obviously her reason. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. Hello, welcome. Nice to be here in front of you today. So as you know, I'm in the management side of things, so this is going to be a little bit different to what you're used to. So please feel free to ask any questions. I'm happy to stop and talk through as we go. But firstly, we're just going to talk a little bit about me, my education. I'll give a presentation about my PhD, which was completed in 2021. Current work that I'm doing, and then just anything you want to talk to me about, really. After that, education. Originally, after school, I did a diploma of community service and childcare. Always wanted to work with children ever since I was about 4 or 5. So I finished school and did that, did my childcare course, went and travelled and nannied and did all those fun things, and then came back and went, I don't want to do this anymore. And I had one of those moments. I knew I wanted to work in sport, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And my auntie's best friend was saying, my daughter's doing a course in recreation. And I just went, recreation? What's that? I want to do that. And so that was my epiphany. And I kind of haven't looked back since then. So I went to VU and did my recreation course. Then I went and worked in the industry. And I was in that era when you had a child and you tried to come back work, they wouldn't give you like management jobs. You had to do sort of lower jobs, and I used to get bored all the time, and I tried to get senior jobs, and I was like, no, you have to be full-time. And I'm like, I can't, my husband's got his own business. I need to be able to look after the children if we can. So I went, oh, well, I'll go back and do an honours. So that worked really, really well with kinder and drop-offs and doing the honours and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's probably not a good thing to hear, but, you know, that kind of worked well. So they said, what about you do a PhD? And I went, oh, well, that works well. Why don't we do that type thing? So there was not a great aspiration to do a PhD. I kind of fell into it, but then really, really, really loved it when I did it. So my PhD was called A Critical Analysis of Aquatic Recreation Centre Planning and Decision Making, which was a tale between 2 cases in Metropolitan Melbourne. And I did that with Dr. John Tower and Professor Claire Hanlon. So I'll do this first. I'm on the board of ANZLS, so Australian New Zealand Association of Leisure Studies. So I've been on that board for 10 years. And they're just an academic association. And I went to a conference and they were re-electing the new board, and my John Tower was the president. And I said, have you got a student on the board? And they said, no. And I said, well, you need one. He goes, well, come to the meeting. And so I went to the meeting, we're sitting there, and they're like, why are you here? And I'm like, you need a student on the board. And I went, okay. And so that's how I kind of got to go on the board. And I was a student rep for all the years for my PhD. And now we've developed a good program in there, which is really nice. So when we start getting some management students through, we can got an association that we can sort of assist them with their further studies if they want to do that. So today I'm going to go through a little bit of my PhD, what that's led to, and sort of where I'm going from there. So we've got the title. So as we know, what we're looking at is aquatic and recreation centres, which are really pools and gyms and facilities where people can be physically active. They're really, really important things for our economy. They give people jobs. They give them the opportunity to be physically fit. They give them opportunity to be part of the community and to join different people that have like-minded activities to be able to do with them. Aquatic and recreation centres, or ARCs, as I'll probably call them from now on, really bring the community together, and they allow different aspects of the community to come out and be shown within them. The area that I looked at was leisure planning within the recreation facilities, so how they are actually planned, how local governments decide that they're going to do it, and then plan to do one. So when I was looking at the literature, between 1960 and 2019, when I looked at this, was 2019. There was 6 articles that were written on leisure planning in general, let alone on aquatic and recreation centres. So there was not really much information in that area at all. So we kind of decided, right, let's just start from scratch and find out how local governments plan for these so that we can then grow and develop as we go through it. So, hence that's how we came up with our little project. So when you do qualitative, you have some theories that you run with. So I had 2 theories. So the first one was new public management theory. So this is a financial based theory. So we were looking at how much financial resilience was coming in when you're planning for aquatic and recreation centre. So this is a theory that's based back in the 1980s. I don't know if you remember Jeff Kennett, and where he was amalgamating all the local governments. That was a new public management theory that he was bringing in to make it more resource efficient, less people doing more stuff to try to save money. So similar, are they bringing in that type of theory when they're planning their local governments? And then we had public choice theory. So this is looking at the rationality of decision making. So how rational were the councillors and the council officers, how were they rational in the economics of decision making? So did they really influence how they were being planned? So for an example, if a councillor said, I want this, is that what happened? Or was it planned properly? Going through those different processes. So using those 2, we tried to find out what the ARC planning and decision making processes were. Which led us to the 2 research questions. We kept it really simple. We just wanted to know how are leisure planning processes used in ARC planning and how are decision-making processes used. To do that, we did a qualitative methodology asking the how questions. So you did a multi-case study design of 2 ARCs, which were purposeful sampling mix. They were both located in Melbourne, and we used a selection criteria to work them out. Data collection. So there was document analysis, there were semi-structured interviews, and then we did a thematic analysis through Braun and Clark using their thematic analysis process. Firstly, I did a within case analysis and then a cross case, and then brought those 2 cases in together to give the final results that you're gonna see today. So with that, there are some things that you have to drop because it's not showing through the triangulation process. So these are mainly the things that were shown through both of the aquatic and recreation centres, but of course they would have had differences that didn't come through that triangulation period. So there were 4 main findings that we found throughout this research. So firstly, we looked at, which came out really evidently, was the alignment of the ARC planning process to leisure planning models. And we found out that it was not the case whatsoever. They didn't use any processes at all when they did it. That was really ad hoc. So that means that they just sort of did what they thought they should do. And there was nothing to really guide them with how they do it. So when you're building a $50 million centre, you really question, or they're now $150 million centres now, and you really question why don't they need some sort of process to make sure that that rationale is correct for what they're doing. So they understood that they had to get certain aspects of it, but there were really important things that were missed out along the way as we find as we go. So this is an example of the thematic maps that I developed for each of the research questions. So this was for arts. There were 4 main areas here, and then there was a range of components that came from it. So for an example of the ad hocracy that came through it, really came out through the research area. So that is, when we're looking at research, we're looking at what they did to find out about why we need to have this facility. So they did their consultation. So we'd expect them to go out to their community and consult and ask the community what they want and what they need. Facility inventory. So they looked at the other facilities that were around in the area to see what was needed and what was required. They looked at the demographics and they looked at, they went to the industry and tried to get support from the industry. But if you look at a leisure planning process, there's usually about 8 to 10 different areas that you look at through the research process to make sure that you covered all the area. You look at local government policy to see what does this centre match what the policy said with the local government, and does it all align? And there were areas like that that just didn't come up through the research process to really assist to make sure that they did it right to meet the community needs. And then we had service delivery. So we worked out that they wanted to deliver community hubs. So that was a trend that was going through, and it's still going through a bit now. So it wasn't surprising that they're wanting to build their recreation facilities around being a community. Similar to this centre here, you're trying to bring more people in to be them engaged and to feel needed and wanted within their facility. We found out who was engaged within it. So we found out that there was a range of committees, and that all the committees had a really essential different roles, and it depended on the committee to what, when we come to the decision making, what process and what they needed to do within that decision making process. We had consultants that were engaged to do different aspects of the planning part and to assist them with it. And of course, we had the councillors who make the decisions and ask all the questions to make sure it fits in. But we also found out that there were financial controlled questions that came in through the planning process. So the creating competition is the compulsory competitive tendering, which is a local government process to create competition within the development. So you'd put out a tender, people would apply with costs to do that particular aspect, and then you choose the best cost, rather than in the olden days when you best buddy down the road would just get it. It didn't matter how much it costs. So that was bringing some competition in it to make sure that they were getting good services and good costings. And then there was management skills. So local governments were planning, having people in the planning process that understood what they were doing, our professionals that were skilled, which was makes it more financial efficient because people know what they're doing and they're doing the right thing, supposedly, within these planning processes. So that's the decision making. Whoops, did I move?
No, yeah.
Sorry. Now we have the decision making. So there were 3 main areas. So there was the government influence within the decision making, the financial influence, and then also the political influence that were involved within it. So within the government, you had your local government decision makers, which were the councillors and the officers that were really involved in those decisions. But state government policy also influenced a lot about how those decisions were made. If you do this, we'll give you $50 million or whatever, not that much, but $2 or $3 million. So they were really guided by what those policies said to what they would do. And we even found that it was to the point that they'd show their plans to the state government, and the state government would say, if you add 3 more rooms, we'll give you another $3 million. And they were like, okay, we'll just add 3 more rooms. There was no reasoning about why we needed those 3 more rooms and what they were going to do. But, you know, that guided our decision that we're going to add these 3 extra rooms to the planning process. So it was interesting how that really made a big influence on what things were done. And we also noticed that when I was going through the documents, there was like 360 documents or something that I read. For one of the arcs, it was all going a certain way, and then all of a sudden I read the next document and the centre was completely different. They completely changed it. They were going to do 2 smaller centres and they were going to redevelop them both. And then all of a sudden they were going to do 1 big $50 million centre. and there was nothing in between those documents. And when you were trying to interview and try to extract out, no one was really coming out with exactly the reasoning why that big change suddenly happened. But as we found out that it was the councillors, and we found out it would come out of political influence, had that big influence. And then there was some money that was coming through the funding. So they really all affected that big decision. But it was just, I was just shocked. I was like, just a minute, and went back to them and said, what's in between here? And they were like, nah, nothing. It was just the change that they did. So that's how state government policy really affected the decision making. Financial influence by far was the most influential aspect within planning a community recreation centre. We found out there were like output controls. There were like 8 output controls that would monitor their planning processes. They had to report on these, being able to get that money and to get the financials through, which is really frustrating because, you know, it's a community-based centre that we're looking at here, and we're relying so much on that money and that output that those controls bring. And also resource efficiency. It had to be really resourceful, and that's where the community hub came in, because that is a resource efficiency method of bringing things all together to be able to develop those centres. So that was by far the biggest thing that came out through it. And then we had the political influence, and there were 4 areas that came through. So they optimised the value within it. Doing random things today. Goal preferences, there were goals that they set of what they did. The reputation, a lot of the decisions were based on reputation and on power. Here's some great power statements. Oh, they didn't have them. Go to the slide with great power statements. There were some really great power statements with councillors saying, I'm just going to do what I want to do. They don't know what they want. We're just going to get this done, even if they don't want me to. I've got 7 councillors on my side. We're going to get this through. And you're just like, okay, so that's where the political influence comes in. It's not affecting all those other great planning things that they may have done. You know, that's a decision maker. They can just come in and make that decision. Which is kind of, you know, sometimes we know that about councils, but just to get those confirmations that they were such a big influence in the planning, you kind of just like, okay, how do we work around this and what can we do? Also found out that there's a real connection between the planning and the decision-making processes. So in the literature, we knew that you have them both. And yes, you know that you need to, when you plan, you make decisions. But with this study, we were able to find out the exact mechanisms that really influence those different planning and decision making and the connections they had. So, for example, the research that really influenced the different decisions that were made, because you're making those evidence-based decisions, and that research really found that, brought that in. Community Hub, as I said before, was a real financial influence that happened within it. And the committees and councillors, they really needed to understand the process of how it was happening so they could make those appropriate decisions, if we liked them or not, later in or as the process has happened through. So it was really interesting to see that great connection between the two. And, you know, and some research has been done since. It's interesting to come back to this decision-making process to see how that influenced different aspects. During writing the PhD, I decided it would be a really great idea to write a book as well. So we wrote the Community Leisure and Recreation Planning book, which is helping guide the subject that we're writing, which is the Sport and Recreation Planning subject that we're delivering next semester. As I said, there was hardly any literature in the area. There were a lot of guidelines, but this book is now trying to make some processes and make some structure to come into that really reactive or ad hoc type planning that happens. So hopefully it's getting a little bit of traction, and we've got some further research that we've done that can add to it as well. So from the research, we've got two main publications that have come from it. So we did one on the new public management and the influence that that's had on the recreation decisions. It was interesting. I was at so earlier, late last year, Parks and Leisure Australia have an awards system. They have a research award, and I was fortunate enough to win their National Research Award last year. So I was asked to present yesterday at one of their conferences, and I didn't actually present on new public management, but I did similar to what I just did on the PhD. The lady after me did policy and the financial influence of policy. And then another person, John Tower, got a publication that came out yesterday, which was talking about, okay, what's the paradigm of recreation? Where does it fit within planning? We don't fit in community. We don't fit in financial. Maybe we need to bring another one in between. So this is an area that may be catching a little bit of traction at the moment. And I did ask the question to the audience, is this doable? Is this something we consider? We do spend a lot of money and they do cost a lot of money to run, but can we make them community focused rather than making them financially focused? So mixed reaction to that, but this has kind of been put out there a little bit now as well to see whether that is appropriate method to move forward. Back in the 60s, we were completely community focused, but we didn't always have really good facilities from that type of focus. So we don't know if we want to go completely back to that, but we need to maybe change a little bit from the financial, because the programs are really good, beneficial programs to minority groups are often not run because they don't get money. So if you run a really good disability program, you might have 4 people that come. You've got a staff member. The membership's not going to cost enough to cover that staff member, but the benefits that those 4 people get probably outweighs the money. So we've got to try to work out how we can do that better and deliver different things. So we started the conversation in the industry, and we'll see where we go from there. And then we also did a leisure planning process, systemic adhocracy paper. So now this paper was stemmed, so we've got the data from the PhD. We've written our book. There was another book that was written by a man in America, and another guy in Sydney, Tony Beale, had a few chapters in a book. And we thought, okay, we've got a little bit of literature here. Let's build some sort of leisure planning topology. So this is a very inclusive version of what these 3 books had in their leisure planning process. Try to understand what you need to do when you plan. So we came up with 4 areas. So we've got the planning context. So this is planning the plan. So before you even start planning, we're getting these areas in order to make sure we understand how we're going to move forward. You're going to do your data collection or your research. So as you can see here, there's a lot more than the 4 that came out through the PhD. So there were areas that were missed in through there. Plan, which this is writing the plan and getting that all in order. And then the implementation and evaluating those plans as well. So after we got all that together, we went back through the PhD and we tried to align it to these different areas to understand what local governments are and aren't doing. These first 2 are from the PhD. So they're ARC 1 and ARC 2. So the green is what they did do and the red is what they don't do. So as we can see, they don't plan for the recreation centre. So they don't know their mission and goals. They don't understand how they're going to do their governance and their decision making. They don't have budgets. It's amazing. They don't have a budget for the planning process. So, you know, it just can blow out. Extraordinary. Plan what they're going to do and understand the participation targets that they want from the planning process. It's all not done. So it's not set up really, really well at the start. They do their data collection. They all did their data collection. One didn't get participation, but generally they get their participation. Community engagement didn't happen really when you got down to this bottom end of the plan. So normally you do so as we said, they do their research and they do their consultation, but this now tells us, okay, you should be doing your consultation in all of these 3 levels. They do it really well at the start, but as it came to the end here, they didn't do it. And that councillor voice that we had that was saying, I don't care what they want, we're just going to do it. We're just going to push it through. I've got is coming through here when they're not doing that engagement and they're just pushing it through when they're doing it. So it's showing us that end phase is getting pushed and rushed through the process. And then their community engagement, and they're not monitoring and evaluating. We've just spent $50–60 million. We're not evaluating if that we did it well or we didn't do it well, how we can improve it. So this third one here is I approached a local government and said, can I just do a desktop analysis of your planning process of how you did it to see if we can try to get more data for our topology. So they came out with similar findings, but a really important thing is they had done a tiny bit of evaluation. I think there was like a page of a few little points, dot points that were put down. I'm like, amazing, we can run with this. But a really important thing that I found was that they said that the councillors were constantly asking them for scope. What do you want? What are your goals? What do you want to do? What's the main thing that we want to achieve out of this? Our mission, goals and objectives, which were started at the very, very beginning. If we got that sorted in the beginning, it said in the document, it took a year to get through that process. Whereas if they could have sat down and done that at the start, they would have had a lot clearer vision of how they wanted to go forward. So it was interesting just to see these different processes. And I asked them yesterday, I said, look, let's do some more desktop analysis. Let's get some more information on how we can do this. And it was really exciting at the end of the presentation yesterday, a lady who works in the facility planning section of the state government came up and said, we need to implement this into our processes. So that's really exciting that we might be getting some traction with it and trying to improve it, she goes, because we're really struggling with community infrastructure development, so we need some way to do it. So hopefully we can assist a little bit with that. Some other work that I'm doing at the moment, I'm doing some work with Pam, and we're looking at the fair access policy and gender equality in community sports. We had a couple of local governments and we looked at their fair access policies, how they were implementing it and the implications that that's had. And we applied that to infrastructure. So the importance of people being able to access community infrastructure to be able to play their sport, particularly females in that instance. So we've got a publication in for that, which we still haven't.
We're waiting.
Still waiting for that one to come through. And we're in the planning of maybe doing another publication through that with just a single case, a really, really successful local government that's been doing this for 15 years. So they're way ahead of the game. And just to map how they're going and what they did and how it became successful, but also, once you've put the policy in place, it doesn't just, always happen. We have to continually work on it, improve, and they still have struggles, and just to explain to other local councils how successful implementation of policy can be really effective, but you need to continue to monitor and evaluate and improve on it as you go. So where from here? I had to put my little B on there. Now everyone understands why. Curriculum development, so we're developing obviously the subjects for the course. Continue to work on the topology and the policy But I'm also open to new ideas. I know you guys come from a really different background, but hopefully some qualitative work can help you guys, and I'm really interested in learning different areas. And yeah, how you guys work and how we can combine these different areas to help grow and develop different aspects. And that's me.